This video is presented by Reverend Dr. Dikki Jo Mullen. Her focus will be on medieval astrology, a king named Richard, and interesting stories.
Medieval astrology. In astrology's long history, this is one of the most colorful, bright, and brilliant of the different eras. The sacred stained glass windows, period clocks, as well as illuminated calendars and prayer books from the medieval period and early Renaissance period, the 1100s to the 1600s, provide lasting testimonials about the significance of astrology during this period. We had Shakespeare's King Lear saying it's the stars above, that govern our conditions. And then in Chaucer's Wife of Bath, in the Canterbury Tales, she talks about being a Taurus and describes her birth chart in detail in her little introductory story. And the pilgrims themselves in the Canterbury Tales announce that they're leaving in the time of Aries at the very beginning of the zodiac. Queen Elizabeth retained a court astrologer, John Dee, who was responsible for choosing the time of her coronation astrologically. And of course, she had a long, spectacular reign, the Elizabethan era, Elizabeth I. One of the characters that I particularly am interested in medieval astrology is King Richard III. I was able to study King Richard's birth chart and consulted the stars. There's really no evidence that he used astrology. Maybe if he had, his destiny would have been a little bit brighter. More about that in a minute. Life was often short and treacherous during the medieval period, and the astrologers of the time tended to be more fatalistic than our modern counterparts are. However, a study of the cosmic harmonies is very interesting to look at in terms of the Knights of King Arthur's Round Table. Of course, King Arthur probably lived about 1,000 years before this time period, but the Arthurian legends really began to come into their own during the Renaissance and medieval period. The Court of King Arthur in Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur was published in 1485, and it's one of the most famous of these stories. The Round Table itself had 12 seats in one version, and of course with something this old there's a lot of variables. Another source gives us 144 knights. That would be 12 for each sign of the zodiac, 12 times 12. King Arthur himself is represented by the sun, and Queen Guinevere, of course, the moon. The sun and the moon in the horoscope. And then we can look at the 12 knights in terms of the astrological symbols. First of all, we have Sir Gareth. Sir Gawain is one of my favorites, and I think I was jumping ahead a little bit there. Sir Gareth was the first knight to join Arthur when the Round Table was first established, and Aries, of course, is the first sign of the zodiac. Gareth was famous for his quick reactions and his skill in combat and his very bad temper. The next knight is Taurus, Sir Dinadan. He was formidable. It took him a while to get going, but once he did, he was a very solid and competent knight at arms. Now Taurus, the bull, moves when it's good and ready, but then you can't stop a bull once it's charging. So if you think of that metaphor, it helps to understand why Sir Dinadan is our Taurus knight. The Gemini, the twins, Sir Lionel and Sir Bors, were twins, and they figured together in the Arthurian legends. One was loyal and good, and the other unreliable and rather treacherous. And of course, Gemini has two signs. All of you who are Geminis listening will be smiling right now because you know how dual and changeable you are. You're both twins. So we have Sir Lionel and Sir Bors. Cancer is the kitchen knight. Cancer relates, of course, to food and to children. Sir Kay was in charge of the new arrivals, the young people at court, pages and squires, hopefuls. He was famous for his culinary skill, but also Cancer, crab-like, for his crabby temperament. Sir Gawain is the Leo knight, and he was brave and flamboyant, a hero in the popular tale Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Green Knight represented pagan influences in the forest, and of course the Arthurian legends relate to the burgeoning Christian faith and the opposition of red and green. We see a lot in holiday lore, but it really began, or probably began, with the tale of Sir Gawain facing off the Green Knight. Leos, of course, are actors and stars, and so that gives us a lot of understanding about why Sir Gawain is that knight. Virgo belongs to Sir Tristram. He became ill on his wedding night, and he was not happily married. He wasn't happy with anything. Complained, and that's kind of a Virgo archetype. Libra belongs to Sir Balin. He was hesitant about making important decisions, and of course Libra is the scale. Every zodiac sign has a fatal flaw. Each of the knights, except for one, we'll talk about that in a minute, had a fatal flaw. And Sir Balin hesitated in the matter of passing a death sentence on the evil King Roin, and this vacillation led to his undoing. Next, we have another very, very famous knight, the Scorpio knight. Sir Lancelot, of course, was involved in the love triangle with Arthur and Guinevere. And this most powerful knight brought back the dead. He had exceptional strength and skill, but his passion for Guinevere became his famous flaw and the undoing of the Round Table. Sagittarius, we have Sir Percival, and he was a wanderer. He would always come and go, disappear, kind of a vagabond knight, a traveler, but he had a special gift for communicating with animals. And of course, Sagittarius, the half-horse sign, the centaur, is famous astrologically for a rapport with the animal kingdom. Capricorn belongs to Sir Uri, and he looked older than his years, and then he was rejuvenated by Lancelot and came back to life. Capricorns are notorious for going right to the brink and then bouncing back beautifully, and notoriously long-lived, as was Sir Uri in the end. A character among the knights belongs to Aquarius. This was Sir Palamedes, and his popularity with the kings of Ireland and Scotland was evident. He was always getting a lot of gifts and invitations. And of course, Aquarians are charismatic, they attract people, and this particular charisma really describes this knight. At the end of the Round Table, we have Sir Galahad. Sir Galahad was the only knight who was heavenly and pure enough to complete the quest for a vision, a lasting vision of the Holy Grail. And of course, this was the idea behind the Round Table, to uplift humanity, to find the Christ consciousness, seeking the Holy Grail, the cup used at the Last Supper. And the final sign of the zodiac, Pisces, is related to the Piscean age, the rise of Christianity and spirituality. Sir Galahad had kind of a shady beginning. He was the love child from Elaine and Lancelot. When Guinevere was being difficult, Sir Lancelot was flirting, and Sir Galahad was the result of kind of an interesting interlude with Elaine, who later laid down on a barge with a lily sticking straight up on her hands and floated away. My beloved mother's name was Elaine, and when I was first researching this, she asked where Elaine fell into the Knights of the Round Table, and when I told her that story, story. She said, "I'm ashamed of my namesake." That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of anyone doing. So that's kind of interesting. But at any rate, Sir Galahad made good in the end. A very intriguing way to look at how medieval astrology worked is to take a look at the horoscope of King Richard III. Richard was born October 2nd, 1452, and about 100 years later he was vilified by Shakespeare in the history Richard III as the hunchbacked evil uncle who killed the two little princes in the tower. And of course Shakespeare was trying to become friendly with the Tudor court, and the one who trounced the Plantagenets and who set up the Tudor royal family and legacy was Henry VII, who was the grandfather of Elizabeth I. So we have to bear that in mind when we look at Richard III. Richard only was on the throne for a couple of years. He died in battle at age 32. It seems as if he should have been a very obscure figure in history, but he hasn't been. There's a whole society, group of people dedicated to clearing his name, and they even have court trials, gatherings to look at how he was framed, and was actually a kind and gentle personality. Since we don't have an exact birth time for him, I want to look at a noon chart, and royal births were always recorded near noon because the sun high in the sky represented success anyway. During that time period, Culpeper's Herbal Remedies was printed, and it gives an idea of how people would use and look at astrology, aside from predicting world events, as John Dee did for Elizabeth I. Astrology was used for health and also to predict rather dire situations. None of the planets beyond Saturn were discovered yet, but of course people's lives were very limited at that time. And so if you think of the way the world is changing daily and the way we're discovering new things in the heavens, you can get an idea of how the horoscopes of the times would have looked a little different. The sun sign represented hot, dry, masculine areas, rank, position, titled the father. This is the Earth's path around the sun. It's the only part of the horoscope most people know. The moon sign represents the cold, moisture, crops, rainfall, common people, children, mothers, fruitfulness, and fertility. Mercury is duality, falsehoods, trickery, expressive speaking, writing, court gestures, observance, messages that arrive. Venus would have been chivalric love, music, poetry, romances, and jewels. Mars, of course, is the warlord, courage, but also injuries and burns, competitions and accidents. Jupiter would be the church, law, science, travel, foreigners, and riches. Saturn is death and darkness, enemies, dungeons, illness, failure, and losses. Taking a glance at Richard's horoscope, his sun was in Libra, his moon in Gemini, Mercury in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, Mars in Aries retrograde. The retrograde Mars as a soldier may have been his undoing because the retrograde influence showed him dying on the battlefield. Jupiter in Aquarius was retrograde, and Saturn in Libra was direct. With his sun in Libra, justice, good manners, and a focus on others would have characterized Richard. By the way, Libra's the sign of the law, and he came up with the concept of bail. Before someone is convicted of a crime, they could put up X amount of money and get out, supposedly to prove their innocence. And so if anyone's ever had to post bail today, thank King Richard, because he was the one who came up with that kind of clever idea, I thought. The moon in Gemini is a duality, the ability to court and mingle with all types of people. And there's a lot of confusion over Richard's true character. Was he a hero or was he a villain? Mercury and Venus in Scorpio give rise to the allegations of murder and also create a good mystery story and secrecy around Richard's history. He, of course, was found just very recently buried in the city of Leicester in England. His bones were found and his skeleton was examined. He had scoliosis, a curvature of the spine, but wasn't a hunchback, which is kind of interesting. His Jupiter in Aquarius shows a progressive outlook, humanitarian qualities, general concern for others. The retrograde Jupiter is someone who's ahead of his or her time in many ways. And it was also in opposition to Mars and its own ruling sign in retrograde action, showing again the defeat in battle and his victimization in enemies, his obscure grave under today's parking lot, which somebody was clever enough to excavate and find out that he really was there, is interesting. His Saturn in Libra is exalted by sign, and it's strongly aspected to his Libra sun. This shows a place in history, an enduring story, and kind of an important impact on the long-term future. A number of stories have been written about Richard. He has quite a large following. Truth is the Daughter of Time is one of my favorite books about him. This is what a horoscope would have looked like during the medieval period. It was square because, of course, the world was square instead of round. And I do offer medieval horoscopes if anyone is interested in an historical horoscope and would like to order one. I do them in illuminations, colors, and paints, and create an interpretation from a medieval viewpoint, which is nice if you're bored with the mundane world. Many of us who like to go to Renaissance fairs maybe remember a past life or just want to escape into an alternative reality. So your medieval horoscope can help you to do that. A very interesting way to communicate long before there were cell phones or the internet, of course, would be to send sealed letters, usually delivered by horse. And a seal of a fate or a friendship was a prevailing mystique around stories of the Plantagenet court and through the ages, protecting the privacy and assuring the authenticity of personal messages was an important concern during Richard's time and before until quite recently. Just as no person of integrity would open another's letter or email today, no one would tamper with a wax seal in the medieval era. The breaking of a seal, except by the intended recipient, was a crime. It was implying treachery and a broken trust. So love letters, betrothals, as well as official documents were all decrees once protected by individual seals. In the time of Camelot, Richard's time, Elizabeth's the first time, nearly every literate individual would have at least a personal seal. Sometimes an important person, like maybe the Pope, might have several to be used on different occasions. Very few of these have survived because upon the person's death, it was a tradition to destroy the seal so that no one else could impersonate the owner. That was when news of death traveled more slowly, and sometimes you weren't sure who was with us and who wasn't. For over 2,000 years, wax has been employed to affix a seal's imprint to correspondence. Some of the earliest examples of seals relate to archaeological sites in China from the Shang dynasty, and a legend tells us that the first seal was given to the Yellow Emperor and was brought by his personal dragon. That's kind of interesting. Another version recounts a boat trip by Emperor Yao during which he received a seal from the sea gods. The common thread here is that there is a heavenly and divine quality around sealing wax, and seals. Possessing the seal implies a mandate and elevated authority to the communication. And affixing a seal that's written by one's own hand, along with calligraphy and other works of art, create a unique document, something that we kind of treasure today. One of the first projects undertaken by Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams after signing the Declaration of Independence was to create a great seal for the United States. The magic of sealing wax and seals prevails to this day, surviving among the more sophisticated methods of communication. Probably sealing wax will be still with us in another 2,000 years. It might outlast the internet and hold its own, surpassing the fax machine and computer terminal. Time will tell. Truth is the daughter of time. The personal flair as well as dignity and prestige conferred by a wax seal is treasured by heads of state all around the world, people of all circumstances, and particularly by those interested in mysticism, spirituality, and by artists. At the writing desk of the mystic, craft projects, greeting projects, and cards, as well as crucial messages concerning meetings and matters, all lend themselves to being presented with the distinct special seal. Remember the saying, the good housekeeping seal of approval from a few years back. A signet ring, a collectible coin, soapstone, or maybe a hardwood carving affixed to a base can be used to imprint sealing wax. An array of commercially made seals can be purchased. There are angels, owls, butterflies, zodiac signs, hearts, and much more. Experiment with some of these to create a personal style. I have a feathered quill, an angel, an initial for my last name, the word love, and a pineapple here among my own seals. Once set, the seal should not be removable except by breaking the wax or destroying it. Sometimes a ribbon would be put through the seal just to make sure that some sneaky person wasn't remelting it and then gluing it back together. Since the 16th century, when it was imported from India, shellac has been used to make seals, rosins from various coniferous trees, beeswax and turpentine, combined with a variety of pigments, will yield waxes that are attractive and secure. Prussian blue, vermilion, verdigris, fine black charcoal, and cinnabar are all dyes that have been favored. Today, commercial sealing waxes are available at gift and book and stationery stores. They're usually in the form of a stick, and red is a very popular color, as you can see. To use them, the wick is lit and the sealing wax is placed down to drip at usually a 45-degree angle onto the paper. Sometimes wax seals are strong enough to survive the post office, but if you do want to use them, it's usually wise to put them inside a padded envelope. In 1573, John Partridge wrote in the Treasury of Commodiums and Hidden Secrets a recipe as to how sealing wax was really prepared during the medieval era. To make red sealing wax, take 1 pound of wax, ounces of clear turpentine in summer. In winter, melt them together in a soft fire, let it cool, then put in the berries, vermilion, and salad oil. You have each an ounce, mix them together, and it's perfect good. Well, I would have a heck of a time doing that, wouldn't you? But here's a more modern version if you want to make your own. Try 50 parts beeswax, 15 parts shellac, and 5 parts glycerin. Melt this together over low heat, and then you can add 5 parts of powdered charcoal for black, or a candle dye that you can get at a craft shop. They have all sorts. Let it cool. It can be molded into sticks with a wick and lit as you want to use it and as you want to send off your special missives. This is Dikki Jo Mullen in Orlando, Florida with Medieval Astrology.